As Andrew Clennell alluded to a bit earlier this hour, the budget impact of the Stage 3 tax cuts has been upgraded today. We already knew the impact of the changes coming in the middle of next year would see the government collect $69 billion less in tax revenue over the forward estimates. Today, analysis from the Parliamentary Budget Office has revealed the total reduction in revenue over a decade has risen from around $254 billion to $313 billion. The government has committed to going ahead with these cuts since they've already been legislated. The analysis was commissioned by the Greens, whose leader Adam Bandt joined me a short time ago. I began by asking for his reaction to the fact the government is showing no signs of changing its position on the Stage 3 tax cuts.
Well, I just don't accept that. These tax cuts for the wealthy aren't just unconscionable, they're unaffordable and they're unsustainable. Labor's ripping over $300 billion out of the budget to give tax cuts to the wealthy while leaving people in poverty and renters in crisis. Whatever they said before the election, the situation now is dire. We're in a housing crisis where people are sleeping in tents and sleeping in their cars. People can't afford to pay the rent. People are skipping meals just to keep a roof over their head. We need to spend this money now on lifting people out of poverty and helping renters and people dealing with rising cost of living, not on giving tax cuts to politicians and billionaires. And I think the sooner that the government realises that, the better for everyone in this country.
The income tax receipts are still forecast to grow by around $30 billion out to 2026, 27. That's after the Stage 3 tax cuts have come into force. You've still seen growth of that magnitude. It's clear the Prime Minister intends on doing both here.
Look, this will turbocharge inequality in our society. The top 1% of income earners get the same wealth, the same benefit over the bottom 60% combined. Men get twice as much as women out of this. And if you're on minimum wage, you get nothing. But if you're a politician or a billionaire or someone earning over $200,000, you get $9,000 a year. There's just no case for it. That money should be spent on things like dental into Medicare or funding a rent freeze. But as things stand, these Stage 3 tax cuts sit like a massive black hole in the middle of the budget, sucking in other programs because of their massive gravitational pull. The budget is making way for tax cuts for the wealthy instead of increasing social services that would help make Australia a fairer place and help people deal with the cost of living crisis. And that is a fundamental reality Labor cannot avoid.
Do you accept the argument that some are making that these tax cuts are blowing out is misplaced, given the upward revision is really just based on an upward revision in terms of forecasts for the income tax take, which means you've got strong employment numbers and growing wages. So if those numbers are growing, so then does the revenue foregone from the Stage 3 tax cuts. It means there's a healthy economy.
Well, wages are still growing below inflation, meaning many people are still being pushed further and further behind. And in Labor's budget, unemployment is set to grow. I think this government just does not understand how serious the housing crisis is in particular. The Reserve Bank has pointed to rising rents as a big factor on its mind. This is crushing people. People are being hit with massive rent increases that mean many of them are being forced to move out of their homes. We know for a lot of people, buying a house is now put beyond the realms of possibility for them in their minds. Even renting now near where you work or where you study or where your family is becoming hard for many people. I think the government just doesn't get that. And if they're making the case that, well, look, it's okay, wages are growing and so we don't need to revise it, well, people are still going backwards in real terms, and rents are growing at 6 times faster than wages. So whatever the numbers are that the government might point to, the pressure on the rental side and on the inflation side is much worse.
Do you think bracket creep is an issue, though. The RBA in its recent minutes said that household disposable income had also been falling in real terms given high inflation, rising interest rates and the effect of bracket creep on income tax payments as nominal incomes rise. Do you accept that bracket creep is an issue?
Well, these tax cuts aren't about dealing with bracket creep. If you wanted to deal with bracket creep, there are ways that you could do that. But what you wouldn't do, if your concern was about dealing with bracket creep, is say someone on the minimum wage gets nothing, but Clive Palmer gets $9,000 a year. I mean, that's what these tax cuts do. They were never legislated to deal with bracket creep. Labor and Liberal voted for them in the full knowledge that the money would go to the wealthy and that it would dismantle Australia's progressive tax system. This isn't like, if they want to have a discussion about bracket creep, put some options on the table to deal with that, but that's not what this is.
Since 2019, 2020, though, 500,000 people have moved into that 30 cents in the dollar bracket. That's 500,000 people paying more tax that will pay less under these stage 3 tax cuts.
But again, I make the point that I've heard the Prime Minister say that somehow the benefit for these extends down to people who are on $45,000. But look, if you're an average income earner, you might get out of these tax cuts, if you're earning about $80,000, you might get somewhere around about $17 a week. But someone who's a millionaire gets 10 times that, right? That's not... millionaires don't need reform to deal with bracket creep. Billionaires don't need a $9,000 a year handout. That's the fundamental reality. And however Labor tries to dress it up, whatever numbers they try to use, whatever retrospective justifications they try and come up with, it is clear that this will set Australia on a road to US-style inequality and rip over $300 billion out of the budget that could be getting dental into Medicare or funding a rent freeze.
Let's move on now. The poll today in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, the Resolve Monitor, shows that support for the Voice has narrowed, 58% down to 53%. How concerned are you by that?
Look, I think there needs to be effort from everyone that I will certainly be joining in to campaign for a successful referendum result. We need a yes result. It'll take the country a step closer to First Nations justice. I think that when the referendum is finally called, a lot of people will focus their minds on it and understand that it will be good for our country to vote yes and see this reform happen. It may not be at top of people's minds at the moment, but I feel that once the campaign gets underway in earnest and we put all shoulders to the wheel, as I'll be doing here in Melbourne, my Greens colleagues will be doing elsewhere, I think you'll start to see minds focus. Then, at the moment, it's not yet there as an issue in front of people with a defined date for when we're going to go to the ballot box. I think and I expect that when the campaigning starts in earnest and when the referendum process actually finally begins in earnest, that you're going to start to see strong support.
Okay, so that you're hopeful of a bit of momentum at that point. Do you think that the challenge, because it's been criticised from the right, but also on the left with people like Lydia Thorpe who obviously broke away from your party over this, is that a fundamental sort of structural challenge for the Voice?
Look, I think you're going to see a variety of arguments put, and you'd expect that in something as significant as a referendum. You are going to see people arguing their points of view, and I think that's what people who are going to the ballot box and casting their votes would expect. They want to hear and they will hear different arguments. But again, I come back to the fundamental point that as we get towards to voting day on the referendum and people understand that voting yes will be a significant step towards First Nations justice, and for people like myself and the Greens who want to see a treaty in this country, I really strongly and sincerely believe that a no vote will take us further away from the cause of a treaty. To get towards a treaty, to get towards truth-telling, we need this referendum to succeed, and we need a strong voice as well. And I think that as we get closer to the time, I think that momentum, as you referred to it, is going to build.
Now, just finally, we'll loop back to the economy because obviously Parliament back next week. I do want to ask you about the Housing Future Fund. You've spoken about the crisis that exists, the challenge for rents and so on. Shouldn't the Greens accept some change, even if it is only incremental? As you have argued, it's not good enough. But with the Housing Future Fund, isn't it at least a step forward given where we are?
Well, people are in crisis now. The rental crisis is happening right now. The Prime Minister called together all the territories and states and recalled Parliament to deal with rising energy bills. We want the government to show the same determination towards tackling the housing and rental crisis. And at the moment, what the government's doing is saying that at best, its program will build some houses after the next election if the gamble in the stock market returns the money that it says it's going to. And it means nothing for people who are doing it tough now. There was nothing in the budget for 5.5 million renters who don't get rent assistance. For the ones who do get rent assistance, you might get as little as $1 and a bit a day when rents are going up 10 times faster than that. We are trying to wake this government up about how serious the crisis is now and that action is needed now. And these stage 3 tax cut figures is reinforce our determination to say if Labor can find $30 billion a year to give tax cuts for the wealthy, well, they can find $5 billion a year to build more public and affordable housing and to start buying up affordable housing now so that people who are in strife right now get the relief they need in the same way that the Prime Minister made dealing with energy bills an urgent priority.
Greens leader Adam Bandt, I appreciate your time as always. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Kieran.